CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories. China's premier tells Asian leaders Beijing can be an anchor for world peace and warned that chaos and conflict must not happen in Asia. Our other headlines, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says Beijing and the European Union must compete in some areas and cooperate in others on his visit to China. A tragic fire on a ferry boat in the Philippines has killed at least 29 passengers. A rescue operation is continuing for those still missing. And the battle for Bakhmut, the conflicting reports about who's winning the military offensive in the besieged Ukrainian city. China's Premier Li Qiang says China can be an anchor for world peace and warned that chaos and conflict must not happen in Asia. In his first speech to an international audience since taking office, Li called on governments around the world to work together to energize global growth and provide backing for global security initiatives. He was speaking at the opening ceremony of the Boao Forum, touted as Asia's answer to the World Economic Forum in Davos. The event in China's province of Hainan gathers political leaders, academics and business people from 50 countries. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Jung Chung-ying, in Hainan. The Premier talked about peace, he talked about stability and cooperation in this speech. What were the key messages?
Well, thank you. The Premier's speech of about 25 minutes started with invoking the notion of a community of a shared future for mankind, which is proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping. And the Premier urged efforts to jointly safeguard a peaceful and stable environment for development and inject more certainty into the volatile global environment. He also spoke about the vision of a community of shared future, especially for Asia, adding that China does not have any plan or any intention for a war and treasures peace, particularly peace in Asia. And he also stressed the country's commitment to reform and opening up, adding that China seeks to win over foreign investors, even given the trade and geopolitical tensions nowadays. And on China's domestic economic outlook, he also, in his speech, added that the country will continue to expand China's market size and roll out new measures to increase market access, to optimize its business environment, and to ensure the implementation of projects, and has pledged to support its private enterprises. So, yes, in a nutshell, I think the Premier said a lot about China's spent a lot of efforts in conveying the message of the China's determination of further opening up and reform. Take a listen.
The momentum of China's economic growth is strong. The economy showed signs of recovery in the first 2 months of this year, and the performance in March is even better. Key indicators such as consumption and investment are improving. We will carry out structural reforms on supply side while boosting domestic demand.
A number of international leaders are also at this forum. What have they been saying?
Well, thank you. First of all, the Prime Minister, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, in a speech lasting around 10 minutes, noted that China has become the largest trading partner for almost every Asian country, launching, regional and global projects such as the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Development Initiative. So he spoke highly of those initiatives and said that China and other Asian countries will not always see eye to eye on some issues. However, he also said that it is important for these countries to strive to work together pragmatically for the benefit of its people. He also said that this will enable all Asian countries to coexist peacefully with one another. And And they will also enjoy the space and security to chart their own paths toward development and prosperity. Also, the IMF managing director also spoke on the event about the need for cooperation and solidarity to overcome the problems like trade fragmentation and to find solutions to reinvigorate international trade in an equitable way and diversify supply chains. That's all from me. Back to you.
Jung Chung-ying, our correspondent in Hainan, thank you very much. Well, Mark Oswald is Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services. Robin Dwyer asked him how, after the pandemic and the Ukraine war, China's economy could reconnect with the rest of the international community.
If one looks at the last 30-odd years of China's economic development, a lot of it has involved, partnering with Europe, we're partnering with North America and other countries, other parts of Asia, and it is a very important part. However, the world has moved into a more protectionist, security-conscious security, be that energy, be that defense, be that food, and it's going to be challenging. It's going to be a very interesting meeting next week between President von der Leyen and President Macron and the Chinese leadership, because the European partnership for China is in some ways actually almost more important in business terms than the one with the US, because there is a lot of bilateral trade between the two.
Let's talk about China's domestic outlook, because there are some signs that the economy could be bouncing back. What's the forecast?
Yeah, I mean, there's encouraging signs like the decision yesterday by Alibaba to break itself up into 6 parts, which implies much less in the way of intervention in the tech sector, because it would be more manageable rather than having a behemoth. That's always, those are more agile. If we look at some of the problems in the property sector, they do seem to be gradually resolving themselves. It's not going to happen in 5 minutes, but they are gradually resolving themselves, and that's a big positive, because if the property market can basically find a base and then rebuild some momentum, that will increase a lot of domestic demand, and it will also make consumers feel a lot happier. And if one looks at the investment going into infrastructure, it's highly significant at the moment. The borrowing at regional levels is picking up at a substantial rate, and that will help also China to be somewhat more self-sufficient in a number of areas.
And the importance of joined up global supply chains was also in focus. How important is that?
It's very important, but I think the best way to describe, we're not de-globalizing, as some people have said, but we're re-globalizing. And by that, I mean people are establishing new supply chains. One, because before they were too concentrated, and China definitely will suffer a little bit as a result, because people will just want to have more options, because everyone's been exposed, everyone's deficiencies were exposed by COVID. So, I think it's going to be something which is going to work a lot more with Latin America and with Asia in terms of establishing stronger relationships with a lot of countries in those regions in terms of those supply chains. And, Southeast Asia certainly is picking up very, very nicely now. And I think that's really where the locus, one of the key focal points is going to be, because if Southeast Asia picks up, then the partnership with China is going to be quite important on that front.
The President of the European Commission says the EU needs to de-risk its future relationship with China, both diplomatically and economically. In a speech in Brussels, Ursula von der Leyen set out what she sees as both the challenges and the benefits of the Brussels-Beijing relationship. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports.
Ursula von der Leyen's address has been described as one of the most significant speeches any of us will hear in Brussels this year. The European Commission President set out how she viewed the bloc's relationship with China, a relationship she called one of the most intricate and important in the world. The EU chief noted both positives and challenges to the Brussels-Beijing relationship, ahead of a trip she is planning to Beijing next week. She welcomed the reopening of China's economy after the COVID pandemic and celebrated what she described as China's leading role in securing global biodiversity agreements, adding that the EU and China could and should continue to cooperate on tackling climate change. But the Commission President made it clear that she thinks China has changed, and so should the relationship. Ursula von der Leyen criticized what she described as more repressive domestic policies in China and accused Beijing of asserting itself abroad by seeking to put itself at the center of a new international order. Because of these challenges, Ursula von der Leyen urged the European Union to de-risk its relationship with China, but not unwind it altogether.
We will never be shy in raising the deeply concerning issues I've already set out. But I believe we must leave space for discussion on a more ambitious partnership and on how we can make competition fairer and more disciplined. And more broadly, we need to think about how we can work together productively, the global system in the future, and on which challenges.
For its part, China has not yet confirmed President von der Leyen's trip to Beijing, but says it sees the EU as a partner from which it hopes to find mutually beneficial opportunities. What's clear is that, though challenging, the EU-China relationship will remain crucial for both sides for years to come. Alex Cadier, CGTN, Brussels.
Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, has returned home after 3 months in the United States. Hundreds of his supporters greeted him in the capital, Brasilia. Bolsonaro is expected to lead the right-wing opposition against the leftist president, Lula da Silva, but he faces a series of legal investigations. It's his first time back in Brazil since he lost the election and his supporters stormed Congress in January. A cargo train carrying the toxic substance ethanol has derailed and caught fire in the U.S. state of Minnesota. Canisters carrying the chemical exploded on impact, causing the blaze, which damaged several railway cars and forced people living to leave their homes. This comes 2 months after another train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed in the town of East Palestine in Ohio. The U.S. military has confirmed several casualties after 2 Black Hawk helicopters crashed in Kentucky. It happened during a training exercise close to the Fort Campbell Army base. The base is home to the U.S. Army's only Air Assault Division, which has recently served in Iraq and Afghanistan. An alert has been issued by the United States Federal Aviation Administration calling on airlines, pilots and others in the industry to review their safety procedures. This comes after a series of near collisions this year. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
Earlier this month at Reagan National Airport just outside Washington, D.C., an American Eagle plane taxied across a runway that a United Airlines plane had already been cleared to take off from. Officials say they didn't cross, but that it was close. So far this year in the U.S., there have been at least 6 near-runway incursions, leading the Secretary of Transportation to call a special summit on airline safety.
We take nothing for granted, and we are particularly concerned because we have seen an uptick in serious close calls that we must address together.
The chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, Jennifer Hamidi, says the near collisions have been complicated to investigate because in each case, the cockpit voice recordings were erased after 2 hours of flying. She's urging the FAA to require 25 hours of recording capacity. Hamidi also wants improved warning systems.
Now, the NTSB has issued 7 recommendations on runway collisions that have not been acted upon. One is 23 years old and still appropriate today.
The U.S. Department of Transportation has issued a safety alert for operators. Among the recommendations includes reinforcing an adherence to processes like checklists and air traffic control instructions. It also encourages crews to diligently follow procedures in order to control workloads and reduce distractions. The runway incidents come at a time when airlines have been struggling with a pilot shortage.
Over the past 3 years, where many retired and exited the system. And so therefore, we are certainly seeing that that is a factor. We're seeing new pilots entering the workforce. And it's important for airlines, for the regulators to be vigilant and make sure that they have the right training.
Shahidi, who was at the U.S. safety summit, says he also just attended another air safety summit in Singapore.
We were talking about some of the same issues as that region rebounds over the next year or two to pre-pandemic levels. And we're sharing the lessons learned from across the regions around the world, what we're seeing in the US, North America, Europe, elsewhere, to share that information so that the regions are prepared.
Shahidi believes the more information that's shared, the better the chances are of preventing runway incursions around the world. Mark Dew, CGTN, San Francisco.
Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is in China for a state visit. He arrived in Beijing on Thursday after attending the Boao Forum for Asia in China's Hainan province. During a speech at the forum, Sanchez welcomed China's efforts towards securing peace in Ukraine. He also called for free trade and urged against protectionism.
Europe is now adapting to new realities in a rapidly changing context. This implies accelerating its Green Deal to lead in the fight against climate change, moving away from Russia's gas and oil dependencies, and building a new green and digital industrial base. China and the European Union, as major markets and geopolitical entities, must compete in some areas and cooperate in others.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid. Ken, what does Europe want from China?
Well, top of Europe's agenda is, of course, a desire for China to use its influence to bring an end to the conflict in the Ukraine. Apart from that, Europe wants better access, more amenable conditions to the Chinese market. Of course, now you have a middle class of over 400 million people, and that's extremely attractive. The EU sees that as a huge opportunity for growth moving forward. Now, I'm here with Laura González Escayada. She's an expert in Spain-China trade. Tell us, Laura, what is the economic significance of Pedro Sanchez's visit to China?
This trip of Mr. Pedro Sánchez to China has a significant relevance, not only from the political side, but the economic. We are seeing that he is the first official European leader in traveling to China after the trip of Mr. Xi to Moscow. We are seeing this year is the 50th anniversary of the relations between Spain and China, which means it's a really positive message, not only for the relations between Spain and China, but also Europe and China.
Thank you so much, Laura. So there you are. And in terms of the economic relationship, Spain and China, that has more than tripled over the past 3 or 4 years. All across the EU, they're hoping for a similar trajectory moving forward.
Ken, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how Shanghai Fashion Week has become a launchpad for the industry's best designers, eyeing the world's biggest market.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. China's premier tells Asian leaders Beijing can be an anchor for world peace and warned that chaos and conflict must not happen in Asia. Our other headlines, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says Beijing and the European Union must compete in some areas and cooperate in others on his state visit to China. An American journalist working in Russia has been arrested on charges of spying. Ervon Gershertovich, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, was taken into custody while on a trip to the city of Ekaterinburg. Russian security services have accused him of spying for Washington. The Wall Street Journal says it vehemently denies those allegations. A court in Moscow has ordered him to be held in detention until May. If found guilty, he faces 20 years in prison. There are conflicting reports about the military offensive in the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Kyiv says Russian forces have made what it calls a degree of success, despite a high number of casualties. But a senior United States general has claimed that Moscow-backed forces are being slaughtered in Bakhmut, with no real progress being made on the ground offensive. The industrial region of eastern Donetsk has been the focus of weeks of intense fighting. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. Stuart, what does Moscow say is happening in Ukraine?
Well, we've had nothing directly denying the American statements there, but the Russian Ministry of Defense says in the Donetsk direction, it says 340 Ukrainian military personnel were killed. Now, specifically on Bakhmut, we've had a little bit of detail from the leader of the Donetsk People's Republic. The Russian installed official there says that we can, quote, soon talk about encirclement of the town. The most information has come from Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Russian private military company Wagner. He has suggested that his troops are gradually eliminating the Ukrainian forces, and on Monday he posted a video which appeared to show Wagner forces in downtown Bakhmut.
Moscow has hinted it may continue with nuclear information sharing. That's despite the suspension of the existing agreement with Washington.
Yeah, that's right. So we're getting clarity here about what Russia is and isn't willing to share. It's been said by the Deputy Foreign Minister that it will notify the United States whenever it intends to take a missile drill using ballistic intercontinental ballistic missiles or submarine-launched missiles. It also has confirmed it's willing to stick with those limits to 1,550 deployed warheads. The rest, though, is what it's not going to share. So that includes, for example, all forms of notification, all data exchange, all inspection activities.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Construction continues on Finland's 200-kilometre fence along its border with Russia. The Finnish border guards said the 3-metre-high barrier will improve security and help stop disruption if Moscow decides to weaponize mass migration against Helsinki. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
A Finnish border guard watches a single car at the Imatra border crossing. And just few people travel to the area now. The border guards say before the coronavirus pandemic, up to 13,000 people crossed here daily. Now, a couple of hundred people travel across the border.
When we had this, like 13,000 passengers, this all lanes was full of cars. So it's it's very hard to imagine, but then it was like different. I was working then, so cars were like, the line was so big, it's like full of cars through here, almost up to Imatra.
But despite the lack of passengers, there is still a lot of activity here. This is as far as we are allowed to go at the Imatra border crossing. Behind me is the Russian crossing, Svetogorsk. And just before it, on the Finnish side, is an excavator working on Saturday on a construction of the border wall. In 2015, nearly 5,000 illegal migrants crossed border from Russia into Finland. Now that Finland is in its final stages of joining the NATO military alliance, This may spark illegal border crossings from Russia again.
We absolutely need the fence so that nobody can come over just like that. Absolutely, a high fence.
The guards at the Imatra border crossing say there are almost no illegal migrants crossing their part of the border now. Yet, even opposition leaders in Finland support the costly fence project.
The Finnish border guard has announced that a border fence is necessary. We have a long border and we don't have enough human resources to control all of it. On the other hand, electronic monitoring must be increased. This is the view of the Finnish border guard about the actions needed at the border.
The entire 200-kilometer-long fence along this section of Finland's border with Russia is expected to be completed by 2026. Aljosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Imatra.
Shanghai Fashion Week is seen throughout the industry as a launchpad for top designers. As this year's event comes to a close, organisers are hoping it'll help to host its city become a global centre for fashion. Our correspondent Chen Tong reports.
One of the biggest shows at the Autumn-Winter 2023 Shanghai Fashion Week. Judy Hua debuted her latest designs on the runway. Hua is an old friend of the Shanghai Fashion Week she attended for the first time in 2009. At the time, it was not a big event. Hua only had 5 team members. Now she has over 40 people in the workshop.
Fashion Week can bring together all types of resources in the industry. It's hard for a brand to get them together. A clothing brand is like a human being. If we were only kids in 2009 when we first got started, at least we know how to walk now.
Hua has become a well-known designer in China and has been cooperating with multiple foreign brands. Her label's growth is a symbol of how Shanghai Fashion Week has developed. When Shanghai Fashion Week was first held, well-known foreign brands were the major players. But now, domestic designers are dominating the runways. Over the past 2 decades, Shanghai Fashion Week has seen domestic designers like Judy Hua who have stepped onto the global stage.
Over the past 2 decades, many Chinese designers chose to put their first shows here, and many designers who want to go back to China to develop, such as Masha Ma, Da Wei Sun, and Wuma Wang, chose Shanghai Fashion Week to debut their home shows.
Now, with COVID restrictions lifted, Shanghai Fashion Week hopes to become an iconic event in the industry.
Last year, we launched a new standard for traditional Chinese clothing at the Fashion Week, and we want to play a leading role in the industry in the future.
Shanghai Fashion Week's ambition also echoes Shanghai's goal to build itself into a global fashion center. The city hopes the value of its fashion industry to reach over 52 billion yuan by 2025, with an annual growth rate of 5%. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.